Hi there, my name is Tom Powers, and I've been an audio engineer since around 1989. I've worked in studios, worked in live work, and have recently completed a master's degree in music for audio technology. So what we're going to talk about today is musical entrainment and how you can use it to stand out. Now, the first thing that people ask is, what is entrainment? So I'm going to pull a sample video from YouTube so you can prove that I didn't just make this up. In fact, you can even Google it, metronome entrainment. What we're going to see here is it's a 4-minute video, but I'm going to cut it down for you so that it would save space. It's only going to last about 20 seconds. But you're going to have a series of metronomes sitting on a table, and they're all going to start at different times. And what you're going to see is without any intervention is they will synchronize all on their own. So check this out. We'll be right back. Okay, so what you just saw there was an example of mechanical entrainment. And entrainment, the definition, is when autonomous systems that operate on the same frequency come in contact with each other, they will synchronize without any sort of intervention. Now, what you saw there is an example of mechanical entrainment, and the metronomes were actually talking to each other, for lack of better terms, through the vibrations of the table. The table is the shared medium. And entrainment's been around for hundreds of years. It's been studied in multiple different sciences. It's in chemical reactions, it's in biological reactions, it's in social sciences. So in music, it's called interpersonal musical entrainment. And here's how it works. That really wasn't studied until around 2004 when a guy named Dr. Martin Clayton out of Durham University started checking into it with a series of other folks. And what they were investigating was what happens when people listen to music. Right now, we see it. We see people starting to interact. I mean, you start listening to a song, and you'll start bobbing your head. Right? You start tapping your foot, start swaying. People get up and dance, sing along. But what they investigated was that underneath the surface, what was actually happening was your heart rate was changing, your breathing rate was changing, your blood pressure changed, and your brain waves changed. And they began to match that of the artist. So if the artist was playing a song and he was angry, you had the same reactions and you started to get angry. If he was happy, you'd get happy. And the synchronization between the listener and the musician over the medium of the music is what we saw manifested when you start bobbing your head and clapping your hands, tapping your foot. Now, if I asked you to name banner songs, and I mean songs that'll stand the test of time, that were created prior to like 1995, you could go for hours. You could be like, Dream On and Hotel California and Bohemian Rhapsody and even in the early 90s, Smells Like Teen Spirit. You can go back further, into the 50s and 60s. You could go for hours, and it's not even genre dependent. You can just pick one and go. But if I asked you to do the same thing for music made after 1995, you would struggle to name probably 5 or 10. Now, what happened? Right? It's not that music all of a sudden became garbage after 1995. But what happened was we started to produce music in a different way. And I will warn you right out of the gate here, some of the things I'm going to bring up, people will argue with. And that's fine. Right? Nothing changes unless we have discussion. But it's a real interesting curiosity that 1995 is when music production started to change. You see, around 1995, is when we started to see the rise of Pro Tools and the other digital audio workstations. And the technology of multi-tracking changed. We used to go into a studio and we used to all play together and we would track it and everything was great and it sounded natural, right? The albums sounded like what we would hear when we went to a concert. But now, 1995, 2000, 2005, 10, and so on and so on, people are tracking now, and they're not even in the same room. They're not even in the same county sometimes, or the same country for that matter. So what we start to get is very digital performance. And from that, you then add in things like quantization, auto-tuning, strapping the whole song to the grid, making it absolutely perfect, going in and gain staging each syllable, to the point where the music is so perfect, you couldn't play that song live to that level if I put a gun to your head. Now, anything that becomes unnatural, the ear stops listening to. If you mix audio, there's a phenomenon called ear fatigue, right? So after a while, you're listening to the same song. Maybe you're mixing a drum set or whatever, and the cymbals are too loud. If you listen to that for a prolonged period of time, your ear stops hearing the cymbals, which is why it's a common practice to, walk away, rest a little bit, come back, and you're going to hear that song differently. The song you mixed on Monday is not what you hear when you walk back to it on Tuesday, because your ear started to hear the cymbal is too loud and eventually started to tune it out. Okay? So if we have songs that are so perfect that the ear goes, it's not quite natural, we don't pay attention to them like we did when it did sound natural. Right? So the result is, those banner songs that we were talking about prior to 1995 came about because everything sounded natural. And today's music is very formulaic, if you will, right? The modern mixing methods and the modern pop genre is definitely a formula. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's the sound that you're looking for. But there are a lot of people that I've been talking to and a lot of people I've been working with that want that more natural sound. They want that pre-1995, if you'll excuse the term, vintage sound. So if you're mixing rock or jazz or blues or country or instrumental, this is the sound that you're probably looking for. And could you use these things that we're going to be talking about in pop music? You could. Can you use it in EDM? Probably, sure. Right? I've had clients do that. Right? So this was my whole master's thesis, was how do we take the modern methods of today, the mixing that we're going to do today, the recording methods that we currently use, because we're not going to go back all into the studio, right? Digital multi-tracking and bedroom production and all that kind of stuff is here to stay. So how do we get that vintage type sound and get that musical entrainment back, but still use the modern technology? Well, what I wanted to do is I wanted to figure out a way that I could create a repeatable mixing methodology that was genre and DAW agnostic, that leveraged psychoacoustics and certain techniques that would make a more natural sounding song, even though the parts were recorded all over the place and at different times. One thing to remember is that last year, 38 million songs on the streaming platforms had 0 plays. And that's because when everything sounds the same, nothing stands out. 38 million is 25% of the total streaming content. In other words, 1 out of 4 songs got no plays. See, when everything sounds the same, nothing stands out. If everybody follows that same modern pop mixing formula, what makes you special? Now, future posts that I'm going to have and future ads are going to touch on depth and width and height in your mix. And it's going to be for artists and producers and people that do mixing and mastering. We're going to touch on things like how to EQ for the precedence effect instead of just regular panning. How to highlight and identify resonant timbre frequencies, the things that make an instrument or a voice sound the way they sound. If you play A440 on a clarinet, it sounds different than if you play A440 on a trumpet, right? Because there's different timbre frequencies that are always there no matter what note you're playing. That makes a trumpet sound like a trumpet. That makes the voice sound like a male voice or a female voice. How do we correlate reverbs and delays? And how do we create a listening environment where my listener actually sounds like he's on the stage, or maybe he's in the front row, or maybe he's 50 feet back? And how can I make it sound like a small seaside shanty, or with a couple changes, I make it sound like Wembley Stadium without changing the mix itself? We'll talk about things like how do you select and direct reflective frequencies, right? The simulation of bouncing sound off the ceiling, right? There are a lot of reverbs out there that do really, really good work, making a room sound like a room. But when you start controlling what you want to have bounce around and where you want to place the sounds, you actually start creating your own soundscape. So if any of this sounds interesting or you want to learn a little bit more, follow the ads, follow some of the posts. We got more coming for you. Thanks for your time.